We are excited to have everyone here today to hear from our four speakers. We have Erin Benet from Case Western University, David Trowbridge from the University of Missouri, Kansas City, Lauren Turek from Trinity University, and Erin Bell from Gerber Hart LGBTQ plus Library and Archives here in Chicago. By way of introduction, I'll begin with a few brief words about HumanitiesX, which is an initiative at DePaul that's supported by our College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences and the Mellon Foundation. HumanitiesX is DePaul's experiential humanities collaborative, and we run a fellowship program that recruits an annual cohort of fellows who work in small teams to develop new community-engaged, project-based humanities courses that are focused on today's most pressing challenges. Each new HumanitiesX course also has students work collaboratively on a public humanities projects. These are things like exhibits, community events, oral history collections, even next year a broadcast on community radio. Students at DePaul can take these students for their major, minor, elective, or experiential learning credit. Each of the courses that's designed by a team that has one or two faculty fellows, a community fellow from a local nonprofit organization, and a student fellow. The collaborative work and learning of these fellows, both on their teams and with others in the annual cohort, has resulted in co-designed courses that blend faculty, community partners, and students' knowledges, networks, and strengths. Next slide. The workshop series that we're presenting today started last summer, and it'll continue for at least 2 more years beyond this one. The series was imagined as a space for college and university educators who are teaching the public humanities or who are curious to do so, to learn and connect. So this year, in line with the reciprocal collaboration that's at the heart of HumanitiesX, we've broadened our scope to include a community practitioner among our presenters. So today we have Erin from Gerber Hart, and at our next workshop on August 5th, we'll have Bridget Hall from the Mystic Seaport Museum. So we're very excited about that. Inviting a practitioner presenter into the series has also had a wonderful effect of broadening out our attendees. We've noticed we have a lot of registrants from museums and archives, and so I'm excited to have you all today to welcome you here and to put faculty into conversation with some practitioners as well. Next slide. All right, well, let's move on. We're going to start with Erin's presentation. And I'll quickly introduce Erin. Erin is the Director of Undergraduate Studies and a Distinguished Scholar in Public Humanities in the Department of Art History and Art at Case Western University. And she is going to speak with us today about tours. Erin, take it away.
Okay. Thank you very much for that welcome, and thank you to both you and to Amanda for all of your wonderful organizational work to make this happen. So the work that I'm going to talk with you about today is related to a tour program that I should say pre-existed my collaboration with the community partner organization that initiated this tour. The tour is called the City is Our Museum, and it's quite simple. It's a public art walking tour app that was created by Land Studio, which is an urban planning and public art nonprofit organization in the city of Cleveland, which is where my university is located. So I've had a longstanding publicly engaged humanities partnership with Land Studio. And the app that they developed, which produces a number of walking tours that incorporate art historical information about different public monuments in Cleveland, largely came out of a course that I'm actually not going to talk about today. And instead, I'm going to talk about the second course that I taught with students and in partnership with Land Studio around this, this tour app and how we could create content that was actually more publicly and community engaged than it already was. So this came out of a class that, and this is the, this title slide for that course, that kind of predictably considered the role of monuments and memory in the city. I'm an art historian, and classes in our department have to serve both the broader university and our majors and minors, as well as graduate students. So you can see that this is a 300, 400 level course. So what I'm describing is work that was really intended for majors and for graduate students, predominantly master's students. So the course broadly, considered what monuments do, and particularly what they do in cities. And so this was a larger question that framed the quote unquote content, the art historical content for the course. And I think probably for many of us working in publicly engaged humanities, this is something that we grapple with a lot, which is how to sort of translate our quote unquote disciplinary content into community engaged projects and what we have to give up or perhaps sacrifice in that process. So the course generally theorized the idea that public monuments project ideologies, that they create, preserve, and project memory in many different ways and over large geographic swaths and time periods. That they indeed inspire, create reverence and awe, that they can be incredibly provocative, and that in so doing, they often use different sort of formats and strategies. They are often temporary and rotating, and they also can be communally made in and of themselves, that the work itself could be driven by a community collaboration. And that really one of the most important common denominators in the discussion of public art and monuments in the 21st century is the idea that they are locally significant in some important way. And that way can, be very vastly. So on the screen are two important monuments in Cleveland. On the left is the Soldier and Sailors Monument, built in 1894 and located in the central kind of piazza of the city. And on the right is a Claes Oldenburg sculpture that was commissioned by an oil company, by Standard Oil, and now resides along Lake Erie, and was made in 1985. So the course content broadly kind of theorized and considered the ways that monuments work in the city. But instead of sort of writing normal papers and kind of just putting this into abstracted form that could be turned in at the end of the class, we partnered, as I said, with Land Studio on a project that they had already kind of created and thought about, which was this app. The vision of the app, according to Land Studio, is to, quote, connect residents and visitors to Cleveland's ever-expanding public art collection, highlight the beauty in our neighborhoods, and to include other notable sites related to the city's history and infrastructure, which I think, end quote, which I think is, the purpose a lot of these kind of walking tour apps that exist in different cities across the globe. So we wanted to kind of think about the ways that the app was already functioning and how it could better integrate some of the theoretical ideas of monuments that we had been learning in the course content. So a lot of the course was predicated on the notion that practicing a more community or socially or civically engaged art history requires that we disrupt assumptions that we make about expertise and who has access. But in its current format, the app and the walking tours, we're actually perpetuating pretty conventional notions of expertise. The entries were written by graduate students in art history, and they really sounded quite curatorial, like most museum labels. And so in some ways, we felt that they were not, the entries were not engaging with some of these opportunities for co-creation, public address, community collaboration that we all know that the Publicly Engaged Humanities intends to engage with. So we met in our classroom context over the course of the 15 weeks, but we also met at Land Studio. We met out in the city space. We walked a lot of the tours. The woman who's, I think you can see my pointer, the woman who's sitting over here is from Land Studio. There I am. There's my TA. And we walked through the city tours. We brainstormed together. And so it was a very integrated classroom experience. And one of the things that came of this was that the students really wanted to subject the existing app to a sort of audit of sorts. And this is an assignment that I use frequently in publicly engaged humanities work, which is to sort of audit existing projects. So the results of that audit, and here I'm showing you just a screenshot of what some of the tours look like from the homepage of the City is Our Museum app. The audit results revealed the following key problems that really engaged with the theoretical content of, what do monuments do and what can they do in the city? Students observed that there were no auditory components of the app, and they found that this was really ableist and problematic, and that it would really be amazing, especially for their generation who always have the earbuds in, to have an auditory component. There were no community engaged components of any kind. So in other words, the content in the tour itself is generated top down, expert down, disseminated to the public, who has to just sort of passively consume it. And they felt that this was actually antithetical to the spirit of social engagement and collaboration with which a lot of monuments are actually made. There was no way in the app to leave feedback or comments. So there was also no way to gauge what people liked or didn't like about the content that they were receiving. There was a lack of transparency about monuments or buildings with problematic history. And this was something that the students really objected to. Of course, much of what we read in the course focused on the problematic role of monuments, particularly in the United States. And they felt that this was not problematized or theorized in the app at all. There was no way for visitors to learn more about anything. Like, they read the entry, they went on the walking tour, but they wanted to access more information. No bibliography, no hyperlinking, nothing of that sort. And they felt, and this was a problem that we faced throughout the project, they felt that the app was not an example of critical engagement or the kind of scholarly thinking that they were accustomed to, but was instead a sort of example of boosterism for the city, that it was almost like pseudo-propaganda in a way for our beautiful art and our amazing neighborhoods. And they really struggled with this. I think the graduate students in the course were particularly attuned to this sort of potential pitfall. So they told Land Studio, and this is the benefit of having a very lasting and long-term relationship with Land Studio, that I felt comfortable with them broaching these topics with the organization that had created the tours in the first place. They told them about the results of their audit, and together we came up with what we thought would be essentially two targeted strategies to address some, not all, of the problems they found, but some of the problems. So the students decided that, and it was really about half and half. Half the class wanted to focus on oral histories, and half the class wanted to focus on these hidden histories. And we just divided up along their own particular inclinations or interests. They felt that these two strategies could address a lot of the problems that came of the audit. So for the oral histories, the intention was to introduce a multimodal component, to amplify diverse voices by talking to people who experience public art in Cleveland firsthand, to introduce non-academic forms of expertise to the app in the form of their personal recollections and reflections about the art, and to include space for the lived experience of monuments, which is so central to the art historical literature about monuments in the first place. The hidden histories agenda was to introduce overlooked or marginalized aspects of Cleveland's history that are not visible. So I think this is a key issue, is that there were monuments or markers or architectural buildings that stood on land that was deeply contested. And there was nothing to sort of recognize that. So this would surface some of those more complex histories. It could amplify diverse histories rather than official ones, which would, I think, help to combat some of the boosterism that they detected. And was a way that they could discuss problematic or controversial ways of thinking about monuments and introduce some of that theory light to the public. And it could introduce sources for further reading and learning, and include space for, again, lived experience of monuments, which was really central to what the students wanted to accomplish. So the course moved from there to its sort of phase of deliverables. And the students produced a number of oral histories for auditory components of the tour, the neighborhood tour that focuses on University Circle, which is what you're seeing on the map. Campus is basically right here where all of this clustering of red markers is. And you can see that it's very close to the Cleveland Botanical Garden and the Cleveland Museum of Art. So this is in fact the backyard of students in the course. So it's important that they, that they were, really felt like these were their monuments. So students produced short audio clips. Oh, is it gonna work? Okay, hold on, there we go. So what you're hearing is an example.
Actually, it was a shock when I first saw it. A shock, but an appreciative shock.
You can hear it, right?
Wow. I was taken aback. And then after I realized what it was, I was said, wow, this shows great insight. And they're sending a message to everybody who enters this building. So I was very grateful to see it. But again,
so this is the nature of the kind of audio files that they embedded in the app using a new kind of flag that would include these headphones that indicated that there was an oral history. They found that the 45-minute interviews needed to be reduced down to about 2 minutes at the absolute most of content, and that was a real challenge for students as they worked on reducing oral histories to something that people would actually tolerate as they were on a walking tour. The other portion of the class worked on these hidden histories. They added a new icon to the map, which you can see here at the bottom left. It's a little blurry. And these really addressed aspects of Cleveland history that you could not see or that would not be visible when you're standing on the street doing the tour. So for instance, on the right, the Jazz Temple is this really iconic, amazing organization that brought Miles Davis and Dizzy Gillespie and all these incredible performers to Cleveland. But now the Museum of Contemporary Art in Cleveland is on top of it, of where it was. And this seemed like a major opportunity to talk about race and politics and culture. And so the students added these really thoughtful entries to the app. So I will say, I want to end my portion of these sort of like mini talks with a note about how challenging it can be to create quote unquote original content for things like tours. And what I'm showing you on the screen is a competing tour, neighborhood tour, if you will, that is produced by Cleveland State University. And they call it Cleveland Historical. They use CurateScape as their software. And there are these neighborhood-centric walking tours that are really thoughtfully researched and written about by all exclusively by students at CSU. So this has no public nonprofit part of its ownership. But what we noticed was that there was a lot of unfortunate overlap, like suspicious amounts of overlap between what Land Studio had created in their app and what exists already in these tours. And I think this was also something that deeply troubled students as they thought about what it means to curate public spaces and to think about tours as a sort of curatorial intervention. How do we not just saturate the market with more and more and more and more and more tours? And what can we do to differentiate one tour from another? And so I think that their strategies, their kind of oral history strategies and their hidden history strategies were ways of also targeting this larger challenge that they noticed, which is how can we be original in the work that we're doing and not just contribute more to a seemingly endless abundance of digital and electronic resources. So I think I'll leave it there, and I'm happy to answer more questions. That was exactly 15 minutes. So I think my turn is up.
Okay, thanks so much, Erin. Appreciate it. Yeah, just a reminder, we have the Q&A space open. So if you do have any questions for Erin, just drop those in there and we'll respond after our next speaker, David Trowbridge. David is the William T. Kemper Associate Professor in Digital and Public Humanities at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and he's also the creator of Clio, which is a tour app that he will present for us today. Take it away, David.
All right, thank you. I created Clio, I guess, 12 years ago. It was part of a class project that, well, other people liked the idea. And so they started emailing me things to add. And I thought, well, let me just make Clio open source and free for everybody so that everyone can make walking tours and digital exhibits. There's immersive virtual tours inside museums. We've got nature trails. We've got art tours, as well as it picks up your location and guides you to nearby historic landmarks. You just see your little pin, it'll move with you, and you see red dots where all the landmarks are. So it's a lot of fun to travel, completely free, independent nonprofit, free for users, free for organizations, like free. And I did that because I'm at a public university, and I actually started by asking vendors how much it would cost, and they were, well, the quotes were, I get they told me to ask my dean, and I thought that, well, you know, that'd be fun. We'd both get a good laugh over that. So I said, what if there was a platform that was free and open for everybody to use, and they didn't have to worry about building or maintaining or paying for a platform? What would people create? Clio, of course, is the ancient muse of history, and Clio.com was taken by a legal software company, and so I just went with theclio.com because that was $12. Fast forward 12 years, it's about $500,000 worth of code, thanks to grants, donations, and over 2,000 organizations have used it to create at least one landmark, and over 500 organizations have made at least one walking tour, trail, etc. So there's 1,800 trails and 40,000 entries. And I don't have time to go over like how to use Clio, but we have free resources on there because it's a DIY platform, guides, videos, and things that walk you through it. Most of the content is coming either from historical societies, museums, and libraries. They create what they call an institutional account, which is free. And then they can sign up with a team who can create draft entries that the organization can then approve. They hit the green button, it goes live. No one has to send an email. We also have a platform for professors with their students. Same thing. The entries will have the name of the student, the name of the instructor, and the name of the organization, creating that mutual self-interest where I'm not trying to give a student a C. I'm trying to get them to an A so that I can publish their work because it's going to be their name ahead of my name, and which means my neighbors will probably see what they made. Okay, go ahead and do the next slide. All right, so the basics. Clio is both a website and a mobile app. That's important because no one likes to download an app until they absolutely know they're going to use it. And the app needs to work everywhere because, well, it just does. That way people keep it on their phone. So it works all over the United States, and but most people don't know that. So they find the website first. Most of our traffic, because it's Google's world and we're just living in it, comes from web searches. And so that's where a lot of the traffic comes from. You can use the app to create content, but that means you're trying to create history with your thumbs. So most people, hopefully everybody, uses the website to create the content, and it goes live immediately when you're satisfied with it and you publish it. If you're part of an organization, if the organization can publish things live under their name, and then the professor is the final say on having entries go live for this name. They'll have the student's name first, of course. When that happens, it's both on the website and the app instantly so that people can discover it either way. The basics, what most people use Clio for is when they travel, but that works. When we travel, we're open to learning new things. We're thirsty to learn new things. That openness to learning new things still gives me hope for democracy. That's the mission of Clio. It's a curiosity machine. Democracy falls apart if people are so sure that they're right. But one way where we can reach people is the curiosity of what's around me. They're open. So Clio entries should not be thesis driven, at least not immediately. Give them the who, what, when, where, why, how. And the next section after that introduction, where you get everybody up to speed and you build your credibility, is you get into that backstory. And here's where you get to tell the story that matters. And then here's links to more information, books, articles, other apps, other videos. I don't have a Clio tattoo, so no one else should either. If someone made an app, that's awesome. I want Clio to lead them to that. But the hook is nearby landmarks. It shows where you are, the 10 things nearest to you, and you can go in and make like a personal itinerary when you're exploring a town for the first time. I always mean to do the walking tours when I go to a conference or whatever, but never happens. But I do go to lunch every time. And so you can just turn on geofencing in the app, say, notify me when I'm within 50 meters of anything, put the phone in the purse or the pocket, go for a walk. And when you get near any of the stuff, it'll automatically play user uploaded audio if there's an original audio narration piece. And those can always include, multiple voices, or it'll just do text to speech if there's nothing there. So once you have a bunch of entries, you just hit the button to say, I'd like to create a walking tour, nature trail, etc. And then you just grab whatever you wanted and it makes the route for you. If the route isn't perfect, you can rearrange things. So it works for both in-person and virtual tours. You can go ahead and hit the next slide. All right. For the individual entries, again, it's text, audio, images, links, sources, etc. And that's really the hook for people. Is they don't know today I'm going to do a walking tour, but they know they want to discover sites either browsing before they go on a trip or when they're actually there. And there's all kinds of user options. Tours and trails, you can follow the route. You can see in the bottom there that's if you want, you can even have an augmented reality arrow guiding you the way. You can choose, in this case, I've got bird's eye view, but you can even choose routes and streets. You can follow that route. You can do a tour in order, but you don't have to. And that's what the key is. Just turn on geofencing, go wherever you want. If you select the tour, it'll only notify you about entries that are in that tour. And so that's worked really well for sculpture gardens. What you're seeing there at the bottom is the National World War I museum, where you can walk around and learn about the art and the landmarks. If you put giant text images everywhere, it would just ruin the aesthetics of it. So you can walk around, but when you get near any of the places, you can hear a narrator telling you more. Okay, you can hit the next one. So how does it work? Instructors and organizations, museums, libraries, etc., just go in, sign up. All I ask is use like an official email address. And if you don't have one and it's a Gmail, just send cleo@thecleo.com a quick email heads up. That way because for me to approve it, that means you can actually start publishing entries. And I just want to make sure it really is the person, the organization, et cetera. So once you do, you can create an account that you will be the facilitator and ultimately the gatekeeper who chooses what gets published under the name of your class or under the name of your museum, library, et cetera. You can even put a big banner above each walking tour to say this was made by such and such museum. Why? Because I'm a historian. We cite our sources. I want people to know our museum made this. Our museum is awesome. I should reconsider. Maybe I should go check it out again. The smart museums always make walking tours and trails that begin or end at their museum, by the way. There's guides, there's videos, etc. It walks you through it. It's been a few years, knock on wood, since I've gotten an email from somebody who says, I just can't figure out how to use the platform. There's guides and videos. I wish more people watched them because it talks about how to actually, make really good content for the public and, think from the perspective of somebody. But yeah, it's designed to be sort of a DIY platform. And you're able to, if you sign up as an organization, you can create draft entries that don't go live until you're ready to hit the green button. And then it'll have the author and the name of the museum, library, et cetera. Okay, next slide. Okay, so there's all kinds of options. You can do all kinds of crazy stuff in Clio. The basic, just start with like a couple landmarks. But because I'm a historian, I made it to where you can see the version history. You can see what author has done, how they made different changes to it. And it's not like a wiki where you have to understand HTML. You can actually just compare two versions side by side. If needed, organizations can lock entries to prevent anyone from suggesting edits. An edit had to be approved anyway, so it's not a problem. And I'd say 99.99% of edits are, the year was 1893. You said 1893 4 times. One time you said 1983. Someone caught it. Thank goodness. I'm not a big fan of cell phones, so I made it where you can use, you push a button, it'll turn into a PDF. I'm just using these smartphones because everyone's got them. They know where we are. And I think there's a potential, if really cool people ran the internet, to make smartphones make us smarter. And that's kind of the guiding idea here. Landmarks are hooks. After telling the initial story, though, you can get into those details and bring in related histories. I'm yet to meet a historian who's not able to do like 3 degrees of separation to their dissertation. So, you can be just on a walking tour saying, you're headed south now. Our city expanded south in the 1920s. Now you can talk about the 1920s. You can talk about anything. You can create layers. The example in the bottom right corner is an example where that entry number 1 is a art museum. And when it opens up, there's all those green dots are contributing entries that live inside of it that do a sculpture garden tour. That way there's not 800 pins on top of each other, which would overwhelm people. So you can make all kinds of things. All right, next one. Okay, some advanced options. Since we've got museums and folks here, we've made probably about 20 immersive virtual tours. This one, for example, is for the Truman Presidential Library and Museum, which includes, if you ever look at those 360 tours of houses you can't possibly afford, well, we basically made it to where you can do that for museums. And then everywhere you see a little blue dot, we made a video of the museum staff talking about the stuff. And then they share it with the public and school groups, et cetera. And I know it works because they tell me, these school groups, the kids know the first 3 rooms of the museum really, really well. And if you've got kids, that's about as good as you can hope for. And eventually, some of the kids actually start to break away from the tour group and become unwieldy because they can't wait to see the thing they learned about and share it with their friends and family. You can even do in-person experiences. I'm doing one for a giant train station, our historic train station, where you can walk around and it's audio. So when you get near something, the audio click on. So you can just put in your earbuds and go for a walk. We've done the same thing for hiking trails. Put in your earbuds, go for a walk, learn about the ecology of the place, the history of the place, public art, whatever you're passing by. Okay, next slide. Okay, I'm going to end early. How about that? So these are just some links that you guys can grab if that's helpful at all. Like I said, I'm just a history professor. I made this. Other people like the idea. That doesn't happen every day. And what I'm most proud of is when I get emails saying, I always thought that place was an eyesore, but now I think it's really important, which is, if you're in a relationship of any kind, the most beautiful 3 words aren't the 3 words we always think of. It's I was wrong. And so when people are able to say, I always thought this, but then I learned this, or I had no idea, that to me is the beauty of history. And I love taking students along that journey where they start with a question and a curiosity. They go out and find sources. And then they come to me in I always have the students meet with me 3 times. And the 3rd time they always say, I can't finish this because the second source told me something different from the first source. And the 3rd person I interviewed told me something different from, and I just smile and I said, if I could give you your cap and gown right now, I would. That is almost the only thing I can teach you. Is all we ever have is a thesis to be tested by more evidence and perspectives. And what if you wouldn't have talked to that one person? What if you didn't? All we ever have is a slice. And we seek more slices, but we always have an incomplete idea. And I've never met a curious fascist. So that's the idea. Blend education with experience, maybe a little exercise too, make it fun, and then promote the good work of our colleagues. And hopefully in the process, it's really helpful for museums, libraries, as well as my fellow teachers. So happy to talk to everybody after this.
All right, thanks so much, David. All right, great. So we have a little bit of time here for Q&A. So you can submit your questions either through the Q&A or if you just want to ask them of Aaron and David at this point. Anyone in the audience have questions for Aaron or David about their work with tours?
That was my timer going off.
I have a question for both presenters. How
Terrific.
could Clio help with the first presenter's city, or how is your technology different than Clio or better? How could you work together?
Erin, do you want to start?
Well, I don't know because I only got the tiny snippet of Clio. I think the question is more for you of like, what do you think that Clio could do for, given the problems that I described? So, in other words, we have 3,000 users. So I don't think that getting more users to use the app is the problem. The problem is more about the way that communities can actually productively engage with those kinds of tours. In other words, right now, they're often just passive recipients. Does your software allow people who use the tours to actually produce content, add questions, engage with it in a co-collaborative way?
Yeah, that's the mission. That's why
how does it do that? So if I go on the tour, what can I do to add to the tour once I've gone on it?
So you can suggest edits. You can certainly make comments, all of those kinds of things. It'll show who made it, so you can actually reach out to them directly, which is always best.
Yeah.
But you can suggest edits that, of course, they would have to approve. But yeah, it's built for this.
I think that's what the person was asking. So that would be beneficial to have those kinds of direct interventions. I noticed this question from Christy in the chat about how well undergrads do this kind of work. And I will just say from my experience that they love this kind of work, and that they're really amazingly adept at doing it. I was a little worried about having undergraduate students conduct oral histories. We did a best practices workshop with Mark Souther, who runs Cleveland Historical and the Cleveland Memory Project, and they were amazing. Then they loved it. It was one of the best rated classes I've ever taught by undergrads, and I think that was because of that kind of direct involvement with community members.
All right. Maybe we could take one more question here. Yes. So let's see. David, areas of the U.S. that need more tours?
Oh, yeah. It's hit and miss, as you might imagine. And then some places are kind of saturated with a certain kind of entry because, it was a certain organization that used it. So, of course, they made stuff that was in their wheelhouse.
Terrific. All right. Yeah, I think it's interesting too, Erin, your app showed a very curated tour, and the possibility of sort of walking through space and having a bunch of different people's contribution show up in one tour seems like a different sort of experience.
Yeah, for sure.
All right.
Oh, sorry. Do we have time to answer one more of these or no?
Yeah, sure. We actually got one in the. Do you have one you want to respond to, Erin?
Oh, so I just saw that there was this question about the community from Erin Bell that I thought was a good question. But if there's another one that you have from
No, go ahead, take that one. We'll have some time in the breakout rooms to ask some of these questions as well.
Yeah, Erin, I thought this is a really good question about the kind of feedback that comes from the community after the changes were made. And I think this is, for me, one of the most challenging aspects of doing community engaged scholarship is that I have no idea. So in other words, if that feedback came, it came to Land Studio. It didn't come to me. And I don't know. I don't know what it was. They haven't told me, and they're short-staffed, and they're doing a million things, and they lost their NEA funding, and this and that and the other. So it's like my interest is not their top priority in the world as an organization. So I don't know, and it would be wonderful to know more about that. Have people listen to those oral histories, and how did they receive them? I have no idea.
All right. Okay. Thank you, David and Erin. Let's move on to our next presenter, which is Lauren Turek, who is joining us. She's an associate professor of history and the director of the Museum Studies minor at Trinity University in Texas. And our next two presentations will be focused on exhibitions, both online and in person.
Hi, everybody. So my plan today is to talk about an assignment that I do with my undergraduates, which is the creation of a collaborative digital exhibit using Omeka, which is an exhibit building platform that many of you are likely familiar with. It has an open access option, which is really useful. my plan is to talk about the goals that I have for the assignment and how I've structured it and how I assess it, as well as some of what I've learned from the challenges that I've encountered over the past 9 years of teaching this class, with the hopes that it's useful for faculty who might like to do something similar, or institutional partners who might want to collaborate with faculty who are working on these sorts of projects. So every year, I offer a course in public history, memory, and interpretation at Trinity University, which is a small liberal arts college in San Antonio, Texas. It's about 2,400 students. Nearly all of them are undergraduates. Trinity has a couple really tiny grad programs in accounting and teaching, but for us in the humanities, it is all undergraduates. And my goal for the class is to introduce students to public history, material and visual culture, oral history methods, and the goal is to do that by familiarizing them with the work that historians do in museums, historic homes, archives, government agencies, and the like. So we talk about how public historians interpret the past. How do they share their interpretations with the public? We have a particular focus on how public historians share challenging historical material. I want the class to be really hands-on and experiential, so we do a lot of work with case studies, trying to come up together with solutions to common challenges that archivists, museum workers, and public history practitioners face. And we do a lot of practicums where students are practicing core skills. We do condition reporting, we talk about database management, we do label writing, practicing, all of that sort of thing. But the big culminating project of the course is a collaborative digital exhibit that the students create all together to highlight a collection from our special collections library and university archives. And because the students are creating the exhibit for the archives and the library, it is an authentic project. They're not just making something for me for a grade, they're making a real product for a real client, one intended for a public audience. It's something that's going to live on the library website indefinitely. And for a lot of our students, this exhibit serves sort of as a portfolio piece to showcase job interviews or graduate school applications. This requires a lot of back-end work to make it function, though. So a few months before each semester starts, I spend a lot of time consulting with our university archivist and the special collections librarian so that we can pick a collection to highlight. And we usually talk through a few options before deciding. And there's a range of considerations that go into the selection. Sometimes the collections are totally new to the archives. We had a collection that came in that had just been processed. It had recently been made accessible, and many of the people involved were still alive, and it seemed like a great way to announce the collection to the broader public and the university community and get people excited to learn more about it. Sometimes they're collections that people are accessing often, but have very little contextual information. During the pandemic, our special collections librarian noticed an uptick in people doing genealogical research that was leading them to send a lot of emails about a collection we had for the San Antonio Female College, which closed in the 1940s and was folded into our university. And so creating an exhibit for that collection gave those folks a new place to find information about the school, its history, and its alumni. So it's really focused on what does the library need? What does the university archives need that we can help them with? We have to balance that with thinking really carefully about what is actually in the collections and how students will work with them, because every collection is different. So this collection, the Learning About Learning Foundation collection, is about it contains materials from an early childhood learning program that started at Trinity in the 60s and 70s, and it has an enormous number of documents, but also artifacts, things like buttons and workbooks that the organization created, organizational files, photographs. So there was a huge amount of material for students to work with. But sometimes the collections are more limited. Last year, I had the students do an exhibit on a collection of incunabula and other early books. Rather than having a huge number of artifacts to focus on, each student had one early modern book to focus on. And then we had to think about how that might, how we could still facilitate teamwork with that. So the collection that we select really shapes the nature of the assignment. I want to make sure every student has enough material to interpret. And I always break the students into small teams to collaborate on the larger project. So we need to think about ways to ensure all the material works thematically together so we can start to see connections between objects and their shared context. I say that, but those themes are something that emerge organically from the material. I don't assign the teams until we, as a class, in conversation with the archivist and librarian, decide based on the material that they're looking at, get a sense of what those themes should be or what the students want to focus on. After that discussion, we can actually sort into teams, and sometimes the teams are of differing sizes. The assignment is created so that each student's individual contribution is graded individually. They need to work as a team because all exhibits are team-based, but they are not relying on their colleagues for a grade. So that takes some of the stress out of it for them. Okay, so in practice, this works as follows. Early in the semester, the class goes to special collections to meet their archival collection, and we do a kind of speed dating experience where the students rotate to different tables with different parts of the collection so that every student gets a sense of the overall picture of what the collection includes. And by this point in the semester, we have read extensively about what public history is, how historians work with the public, how they create knowledge together, how they make complex or challenging historical information relevant and accessible to a wide audience. And with this in mind, we talk about the collection. What is the context of it? What stories are here to tell? What is interesting to folks? How might we lead visitors through the story? What are the tough parts of the story? And this helps us decide on some broad categories, and that's usually enough to get them sorted. And then after their first encounter with the materials, the students work independently in their small teams, drawing on our class lessons to conduct secondary and primary research, to set up and develop a compelling historical narrative, and to select the objects that they want to highlight in their part of the exhibit, which they then have scanned and uploaded to the OMECA database. And they each create pages for their assigned exhibit sections as they see fit. So all of the stuff is going to be live on the website, and so they have to be thoughtful about what those look like. This is where those live. I also encourage them to integrate the further lessons that we have encountered as we continue to read about public history, thinking about making really engaging exhibit experiences, thinking about how they might push their visitors to want to explore further, pushing them to want to talk to other people, maybe share what they're seeing and otherwise interact with the material. I also push them to think about creating material for different types of visitors. So knowing that some people might do a really quick sort of streaking surface read. Some people might scan a few sections, and a very small number of people are going to study literally everything in the exhibit. So you need to make sure there's hierarchies of information for those different types of visitors, and also potentially for people of different ages. So the students work together to refine their themes, to develop their sections of the exhibit. They develop a color palette. They come up with a title for the exhibit. I really give them a lot of control. The other thing that is exciting about this project is that because of OMECA's flexibility, we have a lot of control over the design, but there's also a number of plugins, which means that students who are really engaged in doing the project often get excited about the opportunities to create in different types of interactives. So I actually would like to, I'm gonna actually show some of these on the website here. So for example, in our early books and manuscripts exhibit, one of our students, in doing her sort of study of one of her early handwritten books, she discovered that there were watermarks. And so she was able to integrate a plugin from the Night Lab that allowed people to better see the watermark because of her scanning. She also, wanted to really go in depth to explain to viewers how those watermarks were made and what she had found. On another, this is the tour of the female college, another group of students got really excited about the opportunities for Microsoft Sway to integrate that so that they could create sort of a slideshow walkthrough of this college that no longer exists, giving people a little bit of a tour. I also have had students integrate oral histories. So this is a exhibit on women's athletics and Title IX at Trinity. The oral histories are integrated right into the text
you know, first of all, we've got to back up in history of my
and so on. I mean, you don't need to hear the whole thing, but they're integrated throughout so that people can hear the oral histories. And then, you know, there are mapping and timeline opportunities that are also, you know, really can be really interactive for folks. And so our students, or my students, the ones, again, who get really excited about this, they, you know, they have done a really good job of integrating those interactives. But I also stress to students that interactivity doesn't have to mean a timeline or some other techie plug-in. Some of them have done a really good job of integrating questions for discussion, or in the case of the Learning About Learning exhibit, original worksheets and project booklets that parents can download to do activities with their kids. And there's just a lot of different ways that they can interact. So at the end of the semester, in the final exam period, the students give a public exhibit opening at the library, where each team talks about their part of the project. They show off what they're most excited about. They discuss their process, and I really ask them to get into talking about how they applied the specific lessons we learned in the classroom to their work on the exhibit. So it's a reflective element. In some cases, like with the Learning About Learning collection, where students had actually gotten to meet with people who were part of the organization and who had made the collection, we invite those folks back to see how their collaboration had sort of resulted in this final exhibit. We were able to have them ask questions and provide us with a survey for further suggestion and comment. We always ask the university community to join us. So we typically have a pretty packed room, and students submit written narratives about their experience to me, where they talk about the collaborative aspects, the text that they used to shape the exhibit, and anything else they might like to share. And at that point, they're done and my assessment work starts. And I think one of the most challenging aspects of a project like this is actually doing the assessment. And so I originally did not have a rubric for this class. I sort of graded on vibes, which is not necessarily a really great approach, because usually by the end, I'm feeling very pleased with how the students have done. And then, you know, it's not as sort of clinical as it could be. So I have shared a rubric that you will all have access to, but essentially what I have really focused on doing with the rubric is thinking about what are my sort of core goals. And so I have sections for interpretation, for style and mechanics, for revisions. Did students, you know, I go through and I read all of their text and I offer them edits. Did they implement revisions? Did they respond well? Did they provide metadata for all of their objects? Did they make an effort to create an accessible and engaging page? All of these pieces are part of that rubric in a way that provides them with a set of parameters for what I'm looking for. So it's not a mystery as to what makes something really fantastic and something merely competent, but also so that I have a way of really thinking about the sort of nuances between them. Typically, the exhibit project is a big success. The students really do work hard. They produce strong work because they know it's going to be seen by a public audience and they want to show it off. This is something that the library has really benefited from. You know, they're getting some creation of content, but there have been challenges. The Learning About Learning exhibit presented some, not all of the students were as into doing an exhibit on early childhood education. And so some of the students did the bare minimum. And so we had a number of really underdeveloped exhibit sections, which was really disappointing since we were working directly with the people who had created the collection and they were very enthusiastic about it. This meant that in the summer, the archivist and I actually worked together to fill in a lot of the gaps in the exhibit, which we had never had to do before. My rubric now accounts for this sort of thing and for times when students might do lackluster research. We also once had a student delete the entire exhibit because one of the, I think, annoying quirks of Omeka is that to give people access to create pages and add items, they have the power to delete the exhibit. This is a very bad design flaw, but it is a reality. So we now run Omeka on our own and we do regular backups. That said, my students have really taken to using Omeka. It's really user-friendly, it's flexible, it allows for a lot of creativity. while also having, I think, a pretty clear structure. So there's consistency for the library, and it's something the students can show off as a real project. So I'm excited to talk more with people if they have questions about how this has worked. But yep, for now, I'm just about out of time. So thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Lauren. Okay, and we'll move on to our last speaker, Erin Bell, who is joining us as our community practitioner from the Gerber Hart LGBTQ+ Library and Archives here in Chicago. So besides being an amazing institution that does all sorts of interesting public-facing work on its own, they also were a partner for one of our HumanitiesX courses last year, and they did incredible work creating an in-person exhibit for Gerber Hart's exhibit space. So Erin is going to speak with us today and share her perspective.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yes, it was such a delight to be part of the HumanitiesX program. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today is kind of our experience as a community practitioner working with students to build an exhibit as part of their class, but also specifically from the perspective of being a very small nonprofit library archives exhibit space, and just how we make exhibits work in our small space with small resources. Next slide, please. Just a couple details about myself, my experience. I am a librarian and an archivist. At Gerber Hart, I am the operations director. I am the director. And I am one of a team of 3 full-time people at our library and archives. So we are a small but mighty team. I became full-time in 2023 thanks very much to a Mellon Foundation grant, yay grants. In my short time, over 3 years now working here, I've overseen 8 separate large-scale exhibits going up at our space, as well as several smaller scale exhibits and displays, both on and off site. Like I said, because we are a very small team, I am responsible for the implementation of all of the development of a lot of our exhibits, making sure that the space is ready. So I have truly done it all. I learned how to paint rooms and fix walls as part of this job. So, and I'm the person that wields the power drill. Next slide, please. Just a few words about our library. So we are, Gerber Hart Library and Archives is the largest independent nonprofit LGBTQ+ library and archives in Chicago and the Midwest. We were founded in 1981, and our mission is to collect, preserve, and make accessible the history and culture of the queer community in Chicago and the broader Midwest. We are kind of a multi-purpose organization. We have a free circulating library that is open to the public with well over 28, maybe approaching 29,000, I missed an important word there, items in both our circulating and non-circulating special collections. We have 2 temperature-controlled archival rooms, preserving, again, thousands of periodicals, newsletters, newspapers, as well as over 180 individual papers and collections. But what I will be talking about today primarily is our 1-room Sandfield exhibit gallery space, which we have used to host a wide variety of exhibits, including the Do Say Gay exhibit. We also have a new community room space, which is a wonderful addition. It gives people spaces to meet groups, like organizational meetings, game nights, etc. Next slide, please. Oh, there we go. So just kind of broadly speaking, why should one have their students make an exhibit? Why should that be a facet of a course? And I can say, again, not being an educator, so to speak, not being a professor at a university, I definitely have seen the value of working more and more with students, especially post our experience with the HumanitiesX Fellowship. But truly, it was such a delight to help create this help shape what this course was going to look like as a partnership between two DePaul faculty, as well as our community organization. It was really cool to see students directly, immediately engaging with the course concepts, keywords, and applications. It was my delight as an archivist to be able to pass on research skills using primary sources, improved literacy, both with primary sources, but also with our history, with using our archive space searching tools. Also just seeing the increased ownership, not even increased, just the ownership of research, of students creating works directly that were part of the exhibit, creating the narrative of the flow of each of their sections, and as a whole class, deciding how the exhibit was going to work cohesively. And it was really beautiful how it was an organic process, how each of the sections, the 4 sections of this Do Say Gay exhibit came about. And it was a really fun experience too. We all had a sensation at the end of the class that it was like a summer camp had ended, because we'd made all these new friends with the faculty and the students. So just as a community partner participating on that end of the relationship, it was wonderful. Next slide, please. So just a few words about the class itself. So it was called Do Say Gay, Banned Books and LGBTQ Freedom. It was a spring 2024 class through the DePaul University HumanitiesX Fellowship. There were 21 undergraduates and 2 student fellows. I apologize, I wrote leads there. The course was centered around contemporary book bans and the relationship to the democratic role of LGBTQ plus libraries and archives in the preservation, celebration, and continuation of intersectional queer lives. The course had students reading banned books, as well as, again, going through our archival materials at the Gerber Hart Library and Archives. They met once every week at DePaul, and then once so Tuesdays at DePaul and Thursdays at the Gerber Hart Library and Archives. And then at the end of the course, the students put together a large exhibit, which was up at Gerber Hart for a little over 6 months. Next slide, please. So this is just a rough kind of timeline, so you get a sense of how quickly this all came together. We were collaborating with the faculty to design elements of the course syllabus. I will say the faculty did most of that heavy lifting, but we weighed in on some of the content, as well as the actual exhibit building part of it, about what weeks in the course students should begin to think about what materials they wanted to use, what stories they wanted to tell in the exhibit. And then I would say it just, when we were actually in the class, once it started in April 2024, it all came so fast. It all happened so fast. So it was really wonderful to have all of that time ahead of time to lay the groundwork for how long it was going to take to build the exhibit. The exhibit debuted on Friday, June 7th. Like I said, it was originally just supposed to stay up for the summer months, but it was extended through the end of 2024, and it did come down in January, much to our chagrin. It was such a delightful exhibit. The students were divided into 4 sections of the exhibit, which was Save Our Children, Open Books, Open Minds, Silence Equals Death, and We Have Always Been Banned. Next slide, please. I just have a few photos here that I want to walk us through, and I apologize. The next couple of slides, the photos are really jammed in there because I just wanted to get everything in one slide. You can see a couple pictures here. The bigger one on the right is showing the students meeting in the giant conference room that we share with our landlord, Howard Brown Health. And you can see the students kind of presenting to one another the rough layout of what their section of their quarters of the room was going to look like. They talk about the types of items they want to have on display. They talk about what like keywords and theory from the course they're going to integrate into their sections. They talk about what color they're going to paint the walls, etc. Next slide, please. So this is two pictures side by side. This was that first section. Oh, also some of the pictures, they were taken like the day before the exhibit closed, and some of the pictures a little moody with the lights are off, so I apologize if it's a little tough to see. But this first section was called Save Our Children, and you can see that they wanted to create kind of a classroom, an elementary school class sense. So the students actually put handprints on the walls, made it really engaging, very colorful. It might be a little tough to see, but on the right side of the wall there, you see a little dartboard. That's actually an Anita Bryant dartboard, which I can tell you all about that if you have any questions. But that involved an interactive part of the exhibit. And in the right little sliver of a picture there, you can see one of our volunteer shift leads. Everyone was making handprints on the wall. I also made some. Next slide, please. This next section was the Open Books, Open Minds. There were a lot of foam board cutouts put on the walls, framed materials and posters. This was, again, looking at the role of libraries and bookstores as catalysts for political action. Next slide, please. The Silence Equals Death section. So this was the first time to our knowledge in the history of this exhibit room that we actually painted one of the walls black. It was very evocative. The students actually drew outlines of a couple of them themselves and had a few interactive questions that visitors were meant to respond to with chalk. And so this is how it looked at the very end. You can see all the writing all over the wall. We also used this, I mean, it was a big wall space, so we had a lot of our posters on display. One of the students was posting materials that were from obituaries of folks who had passed away from AIDS. It was very emotional, very heavy. And yeah, it was the first thing you saw when you walked into the space. Next slide, please. And then apologies, this is 4 different pictures jammed into one. So this was in the corner. This was the We Have Always Been Banned section, and they created just a little fake bar, a gay bar space. To do that, we actually repurposed a couple panels from a previous exhibit, which also was using that same corner to recreate a gay bar space. Again, the wall was black. There are a lot of posters and reproduction flyers. They used fairy lights very creatively. One of my favorite elements is they put temporary brick like wallpaper, peel and stick wallpaper, and then we spray painted over it to make it look like graffiti. It was very creative. Next slide, please. So just really quickly, some of the challenges with this exhibit, with a lot of exhibits, but primarily with working with the students, we had issues with time management. Again, just the navigation of everybody's class and life schedules. There were unexpected delays. There was some last minute work. There were things that were outside of our control. Thanks for the 3-minute warning. There was definitely a learning curve with building exhibits for all of the students. It was their first time building an exhibit. And we also had very limited resources, even with our combined budgets. As far as lessons learned, I think it was just pretty much try to keep it simple, don't do too much, try to be patient and adaptable and compassionate. We wanted to make sure that at the end of the day, students were having a good time, that, you know, this wasn't too overwhelming. And I think we were also really excited to try new things and to take chances. So it was just a wonderful experience overall. Next slide. Just really quickly, this was our budget and cost breakdown of what it was like to put an exhibit like this together. You can see the 4 different sections and how much each group respectively spent. I think one of the largest singular expenses was we had vinyl wall signs on the wall, which helped make it feel more like a legit exhibit space. And that was a little bit more expensive, but this is just an idea of how much we spent. Next slide, please. As a small organization, we use a lot of things, reuse a lot of things. We have a lot of pop-out frames. We do a lot of wall mounting on foam core. We do have on-site display cases and a lot of plastic display signage. We make a ton of reproductions so that we don't have to keep, carefully posting originals on the walls. So next slide, please. this is just my last slide of the final takeaways from this whole experience as a community partner and working with students, was just thinking about, how might you incorporate an exhibit or display into your course, thinking about fun things like take-home elements from the exhibit, button stickers, quizzes, or candy. I'm always asking folks when they're putting together exhibits to make sure that they think about larger font size, placing things lower, thinking about non-English language options, and I always ask everybody and press everybody to use the resources we have to save money. But working with DuSage and HumanitiesX was, again, such a great experience. It's led to so many more opportunities and partnerships between us and DePaul. And I think we're really, really excited now to consider future exhibits that are done in partnership with students and classes. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Erin. Amanda, if you want to bring us all together maybe, and we can ask a few questions of Lauren and Erin. And I'll add that Erin, the DuSage class actually happened, we are in quarters here at DePaul, so it was actually 10 weeks that they managed to do all this in, which they win the award for remarkable sprint from start to finish. All right. So again, you all can feel free to either put questions in the chat, put them in the Q&A, or you can just turn off your mic and ask them of our presenters. I'll handle the ones that come in through the Q&A. I can start maybe I'll start one. Lauren, when you were speaking, I did have a question about how much interfacing you were doing with the librarians during the actual course.
We are in constant communication about how things are going. They keep track of when students come to the Special Collections Library and Archive, so they keep a track of how things are going so that I can check in. We are tracking, our students uploading? Are they doing metadata? We keep a close watch because we want to make sure that people are, this is not a project where students can wait till the last minute, which it's when people see the assignment, it's super scaffolded. There's a lot of instructions, and so it's a lot of interaction. So yeah, our archivists and special collections librarian are amazing. We have those two people and one half-time person, so they are super overworked too. So I am very appreciative to them for all of the effort.
Terrific. All right, we have a couple questions coming in the chat here. So the first one, for exhibitions, how do you approach curation and navigate the challenges when working with limited collections? Does one of you want to take this?
And Lauren, would you like to start with that one?
Yeah, this is, I think, one of the places where it's really exciting for undergraduates because it requires them to be creative about what we have. It's always interesting, even in collections that are not that limited, to see areas where students overlap. So which things they choose to highlight, which artifacts they pick. And so it can be a very good teaching lesson for how do you interpret, if we mostly have textual documents, if that's most of the collection, how do we make something interesting and engaging with that? And I find it really exciting. Again, not every student, but many of our students just surprise me with how creative they are, and they come up with really great ways to handle that. Is it super consistent across the whole exhibit? No, but they're undergraduates and they're learning, and but mostly I'm really pleased with what they do.
Yeah, I'll just say to that real quick that with our experience, normally it's we as an organization will start with an idea and we'll look at our collections, which are all about the queer community, queer history, and we'll try to find collections that would lend themselves well to supporting the exhibit. With the class, we were starting with this framework of these 4 different sections, and so we brought out like half of our archives. It was so much. We brought out so much and let the students be guided by what they were, what pulled them in, what stories and archival materials they were really interested in. And that is what shaped each of those sections. It was kind of slightly inverted way of going about it, but it again really gave the students a stronger sense of connection to the exhibit, and it again just turned out really beautifully.
We have a question about how much was conceived of before the class and how much time was spent teaching students curatorial techniques. And I know, Erin, in your class, the professors had, and this I think was a decision that they made strategically based on our 10-week quarters and just a sense that it would be too hard to give them all sort of blank slate. So they had identified the themes beforehand, but could you speak to the
Yes.
curatorial question a bit?
Yeah, we gosh, I think about 3 or 4 weeks in, we just had part of the class where we walked through and showed the students just how to properly handle archival materials. We talked about the materials that we had available at Gerber Hart. We gave them examples of past exhibits that we have done, the past exhibits having been done primarily by volunteers, folks with pre-existing curatorial experience, and also just our lived experience seeing what worked and what didn't in that space. So we did give the students that, but then truly it was, I think, just kind of feeling out each of their sections. And each of the sections were so different, especially with things being mounted on the wall of foam core versus endless frames being hung. And some exhibits that were a little bit more display case heavy versus having interactivity on the wall. It was really cool.
Yeah, the fact that it's an Omeka exhibit for us is imposes certain limitations on what is possible. So the library has a template that it uses for all of them because it wants a certain uniformity. We have a lot of flexibility with color and the buttons that we make and all of that sort of thing, but there are some really clear limitations. I spend a lot of time in class looking at examples with students, so they look at other digital exhibits. They make we spend time in the classroom together talking about what do we like about these digital exhibits that are out there, what's working, what's not, what do we want to take from it for our exhibits. And then it's very interesting to see how students actually apply that as they're getting things set up. And I have to say, Omeka is very easy to use to do a very basic exhibit. That part's not hard, but the student creativity is really critical for making it something, I think, really exciting. So you see variation there in terms of their different pages, what they have done with what is possible in our setup.
Right. Any final questions for Lauren or Erin? All right. We have one more question. For exhibits, do you consider the storytelling aspect of building the exhibit? Is there an effort to pull a cohesive story through the disparate exhibit sections?
Yeah, that is essential. I mean, we spend again, it's a 3-hour. We are a 3-hour class that meets once a week, so we actually have quite a lot of time for discussion. And so the students share with each other what they're working on, and we think about where are their connections, where can we make sure that this makes sense cohesively. And one of the nice things about Omeka is you actually can very easily rearrange your sections so that they make sense, but also people can circulate any way they might choose. So we think about where might it be important to have not in a super repetitive way, but repeated information, so that the core, if we want them to take away three things from our exhibit, what are the 3 things? And we make sure that that's coming through in each section.
Okay. Thank you both. So we're going to, as advertised, move into our workshop part of the session today. We're going to give you a 5-minute break to stretch a little bit and to think about the workshop question, the prompt, which was sent by email. I'm attempting to pack it apart, and there's 100,000 character limit in the chat. So we have to, Amanda will stick the prompt on a slide in the chat here. But again, take 5 minutes. We'll return at 3:31. Think about whether you want to answer this prompt with exhibits or tours. So would you think about doing an exhibit for a particular class or for your organization, or are you thinking about a tour? And then just do a little bit of brainstorming on this, and then we'll return at let's say 3:31, and we'll split you into groups by tours and exhibits, and you'll have a chance to talk with our presenters and with some of your colleagues on the call.
Thank you all so much for attending, and for those who stuck with us for these conversations. It's always really exciting to hear the ways that folks are thinking about this across institutions and across the country. So thank you all for your energy today. And we'd love to see folks at future workshops. You can follow HumanitiesX and learn about those before anybody else. If you go to bit.ly/subscribe HX News, and that'll get you subscribed to our newsletter, which I promise we won't spam you with. That will be full of resources out. You can also follow us on Instagram and get some more regular updates there about our current cohort, the courses that they're building, and then eventually the students and courses they work. So I believe that's all I have, but thank you again to our presenters today. We have Erin Benet, Lauren Torek, David Trowbridge, and Aaron Bell, who thank you so much for your expertise and insights. It's been a real pleasure.